Do-do-do-do-do, funky fantasy. Do-do-do-do-do, the bowl. On special guest episode edition. And tonight we're actually missing Stratus Eros. He wasn't able to make it because it's his birthday. So all y'all
Happy
listeners wish him a happy birthday to Ryan. But tonight is super exciting. I'm one of your hosts, Nathan Helm.
Alfred Muller.
And we have two special guests tonight. We've got Mick Mawassel up top and his co-author, David, down below, or whichever direction that you might be seeing it from. But these gentlemen agreed to come on and be our guests tonight and to get to spotlight them. So welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on, and take the floor away and tell us about yourselves.
Well, thanks for having us. So David and I are friends from college. We've known each other a long time. When I decided to really hunker down and write my book, I dragged him along for the ride. I reached out to him and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm working on this thing. You're an English major. You want to take a look at it?" And so he started taking a look every once in a while. He looked at like the first act, and we just sequentially met weekend after weekend after weekend until he was intimately involved in the whole process, to the point where he's gone from like alpha reader to editor to co-author of the series at this point. And he's been along for the ride for, what are we at? Like, we're approaching a decade. Let's see, 20.
I don't like it when you say stuff like
8
that.
years.
Yeah, man.
So we wrote Paragon Exordium and published it in 2023. This is the cover. It is an epic genre-bending fantasy about a magical apocalypse that takes place in our world.
I'd just like to say that's an awesome cover. Did you guys get a cover artist, or did you kind of design that yourself, or what was that process?
So there's elements to that. So when I was in high school, I had the idea for this, and a good friend of mine at the time was an artist, and I commissioned her to draw the original concept I had, which was just like a scene in Atlanta with a character who I hadn't even fully developed in like beneath like a collapsed bridge. So she was in high school at the time. Her art's fantastic, but it didn't age with the story. And the scene didn't make sense in the context. Like the outfits had changed, a lot of the story elements had changed. The scene was still the overall concept that was still in our head. So we approached an artist on Twitter. We went through a lot of artists to try and figure out who we wanted to hire. We hired Serena Malon, who is a fantastic artist up in Canada. She's done art for Magic the Gathering. She won a Tolkien Society Award. She is a very, very talented artist, and she's it costs what you would expect of a talented artist, but she gave us some really great, she read through a bunch of the book first to try and get inspired. She gave us a lot of different concepts, but this one was so similar to the original one, and it was really the most popular one with the people we pulled, so we hired her on, and she did just a phenomenal job with it. Really great artist to communicate with. She had a lot of great back and forth. So we're hoping to get her again. We'll see. We'll see. Because, we got to sell a couple more 1,000 books before we do.
Yeah, cover art is not cheap. I mean, the cover artist I use myself, I mean, he's up there. But, when you love your book and you want it to be, good, and you want that cover to be catchy, right. You're willing to. So it's awesome you guys were able to find y'all a cover artist that you are happy with and that you enjoy.
Yeah, and we did a cover before this one that was an artist I really like, who I've gotten a lot of character art from, that we just ended up, we had enough of it just wasn't perfect. And we all kind of agreed it wasn't perfect. And so after a while, we decided to mix it up and try and find someone else. So we have an old cover that we never even actually used. That's like deep hidden in my old social media accounts and stuff. But yeah, once this was done, it was just like, yeah, that's it. That's the one right there.
Awesome. And can you hold that book up one more time, center screen for everybody who's watching?
Oh yeah.
Right over to your. Yeah. There perfect. You go. Perfect.
Cover your face completely. Just go ahead and.
And this is the paperback, which is matte, so it shows up a little better. But on the hardcovers, the sky bit, the shattering on the sky wraps around.
Oh, that's cool.
So I've actually got one. Let me grab one from behind me real quick.
Yeah, the original cover that we had was pretty good. Although well, yeah, you just look at the.
Yeah, that's nice.
That is nice.
Yeah. It was a more traditional kind of fantasy, prominent sword on it, right? Kind of grasping and everything else. We kind of wanted to go a different direction with it. And the one that we ended up going with looks more like Mick's original picture that got out, right, with the kind of background in it and everything. So it ended up, I think, showing more the kind of story we had going for us. So
cool,
awesome.
So with that being said,
yep,
you said genre bending work. What genre would you classify your story as?
So we've gone through this so many times and just like kind of reclassified it. With a lot of the feedback I've been getting through like book talk and people who've read it and stuff, I think the most fitting one has been epic rural fantasy. And I've had people like it's the first of its kind in a lot of ways because it's not quite urban fantasy. It's definitely epic fantasy, but urban fantasy sort of gives it the wrong perspective. So calling it an epic rural fantasy, I think, is really where it is. And that's not even a category on Amazon. Otherwise, I think we might be the top contender for that spot. Trying to find a way to commission them.
That's funny, that's very similar to what I write because I tell everybody it's an urban fantasy with an epic style. So I'm with you. Let's push this to try and get it on Amazon and all those other sites. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. I was going to ask, have any of you guys had readers come up to you and say that your writing reminds them of an anime, or that it feels anime-ish from any of your readers?
Well, Dave, I would.
The
40K is not
the
anime.
one that I get isn't anime. It's sometimes like 40K. We have a lot of 40K friends. And when you start telling people that your book has dudes shooting machine guns at orcs, they start to get real excited. So since it bends in a couple of different ways, right? I get 40K when I try to explain it to people. Maybe it's just the people I hang out with. It's a lot more science fiction, space opera kind of nerds, but that kind of pushes the buttons for them on that side. I haven't had anybody say anime yet, but I am not as big into anime as Mick is. So maybe I just run in a circle where that's less of a thing.
Listen, tangentially, there's a Soul Eater reference in this book.
I'll have a question on that later for you. But if you guys need something easier, because we're both anime lit, it's a genre thing that we're pioneering, but it's not. This is spotlight for you guys, so I want to make sure to keep the questions focused as much as I can. If you need an easy way to focus and your readers want to know, just call it a kit bash. I mean, I've had to do that a few times. Kit bash is when you take multiple genres, things that you love from multiple things you grew up with that inspired you to write your book, and you kit bashed it. So maybe it's a science fantasy, or maybe it's it's an urban space opera, or maybe it's just a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi put together. And that can kind of help people. A lot of people know what kit bashing is. So
I guess to your point, the only one maybe, and I'm not an expert, I might be totally wrong. Someone had said it reminds them of Gate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I assume that's just because of the mix, the fantasy modern sort of clash situation that's happening in the story. I would assume.
In ways, it's like a reverse isekai. If you turn the isekai concept of a guy dies and goes to fantasy world, it's just the fantasy world gets dropped on our world.
That's cool.
Try metaphysical. Look up that definition for you guys, and that might be something that you can use as a subgenre or a category word, as metaphysical or alternate world. Because technically you said it's our world, but it's an alternate version. So you can use alternate world, which is a science fiction category, and you can also try metaphysical.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are indie published, correct?
Yep.
See, that's the beauty of indie publishing. You don't have to fit yourself into a genre. You can write whatever you actually want, and then say, here's my book, this is what it's about. Don't worry about the genre, just read it and enjoy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I love calling it genre bending too, because there's so many elements of different genres in it, right? We talk about, there's a military fantasy, a military fiction element that's really, really strong. There's some light thriller horror elements. There's mystery elements. And I mean, I think those are all just elements that make it a good story, right? But I don't want anyone to be like, oh, it's epic fantasy, that's not for me. Because really, I think this book's for everyone. It's a great starter fantasy, but I don't want to scare people off with epic fantasy because of how it reads.
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah. Just tell them it's not traditional fantasy and to have an open mind going into it. And that
tends to work.
Yeah.
So we got a list, and we're gonna make you guys sweat tonight. So
okay,
here we go. My first question for you is, what's your process for creating your world, characters, and your universe?
That's such there's so many layers to that. So like the concept of the story came to me in like high school. I had a dream in high school after watching Red Dawn, and I was reading Lord of the Rings at the time, and that's where kind of the concept of the book came from. Also loosely sort of some Reign of Fire vibes, if you've ever seen Reign of Fire. Like take Reign of Fire, but instead of just dragons, it's everything fantasy. So that's where the concept came from. And then from high school on, I just would take notes and build concepts and storylines and scenes in my head over the years. And so once I got to working with Dave, it became much more of a, as Dave likes to put it, building the car while driving. I believe is the turn of phrase he likes to use. So we've had like, I had some things like the origin of species. I have a lot of stuff that isn't gone into in the book because it's too Tolkien-esque in its level of detail. And we have another rule we have. Dave, what's your rule?
Okay, I got you. That's more for the writing process, right? So yeah, make as the genesis of this, right? If you start to wax poetic in your prose about the ancient elf said this and this, and if I can't keep up with it, or I start trying to flip the page, like time out, because you're gonna, you have to balance, getting that into the story without losing your readers in the 40 pages of Hobbit backstory before you hit the Lord of the Rings kind of situation, right?
Yes, indeed.
So our writing process is really, it's evolved a lot because what we do is at this stage, what we do is we write the first draft, but our first draft involves us planning out a set of chapters, working on those chapters until we feel they're ready, which means editing them over and over until like, okay, this is good enough for us to move on to where the story is contained enough. And then we move on to the next one, and then we do the next set of chapters and move on to that. And then I run those by my wife, who's my wife's super involved in this too. She doesn't write, but she's an English teacher. And so she's constantly giving us feedbacks, and I'm calling her into meeting like, hey, let's discuss this concept. Anytime magic is used, she is consulted to keep me in line with the rules and the system we set up. Drawn a lot of inspiration from like the Inheritance Cycle, Aragon, of course, those books, Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of different influences, but we really one of the big things we look at is like, how can we make this ours? How can we make this unique? And looking at the history of like races like elves and dwarves, and how do we make it unique in a way that feeds into their culture? And so we work on their history, and that develops into working on their culture, and that develops into working on how they interact and interact with other characters and one another and stuff. So it's largely character driven writing in a lot of ways, and I'm losing.
Yeah. So you asked at the beginning, part of your question originally was, how did you come up with a lot of your characters, right? Originally, a lot of the characters in the story were based on people that we all personally knew. It was an easy shorthand, right? Hey, some of the names are very similar or almost the same, right? So a lot of the initial people, especially on the protagonist side, right? Especially, not all of them, but especially on the protagonist side, are people that we're both friends with or were at the time, as it's been, a little bit. So we kind of shorthanded in some people, and we were able to base it on individuals that we interacted with a lot. Now, if you went back today and looked at a lot of those characters, depending on how the story's gone, some of them are not similar to those individuals anymore. So the bones were real people, but they're not. The characters now are their own entity, right? So I can point in my head to several characters that started as people that we knew and either ended up being radically different from them, or and on some occasions I could see people, they're like, yeah, they're still like that, so they're their own thing now. That the bones of it was real people, but they're their own characters. So.
And it's really fun when your friends are reading it and they're like, okay, I recognize this. I know who this is supposed to be.
See, that's great, because I think like I did that in my first drafts. I think a lot of authors will start in that aspect, but I love that you said the bones are there, but they've grown and they're different characters now. That I think just shows a mature author, or in this case, authors. And it sounds like you guys got a great group that it helps out to put the stories out. But it just shows that you're mature enough in your writing to be like, okay, I like this stuff, but it's not this person. I need to make them their own, and I like that. That's a great thing for young authors watching this to really understand the process of writing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alfred, if you want to hit the next one on the list, brother.
Yes, it's actually one that ties in pretty well. So I'm curious, with the process that you guys have, do you ever run into writer's block? And if you do, how do you combat it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I do probably 95% of the writing. Dave comes through and so Dave's in the army. He comes through and like military stuff. He makes language work. He makes sure, because that's a big thing. This is a big military element to the book, and I want to make sure no military personnel is ever going to read it and cringe at the language use or
we do it on purpose.
Tactics. Or yeah, well, yeah. So, well, you completely threw me off.
Writers, yeah.
Yeah, writer's block. So how do I combat that? A couple different ways. Having multiple POVs really helps me with that. We're constantly swapping between our POVs, and usually when I'm having writer's block, it's like I don't know what I want to do. I know where I want to go. I just am not sure how to get there. Especially like dialogue and stuff. So I'll take a break and I'm like, I'm going to write a different character. And sometimes I'll be working at 4 different, and I'll get writer's block in the middle of a session, like 5 minutes into writing something. I was like, I'm stuck here, and I'll swap to a different POV. I'll be working on 4 or 5 chapters at a time sometimes. And if it's really bad, I'll just sit down and open a notebook and work on my Silmarillion kind of concept. I'm working on like a history of the character's history of the world thing to just try and flesh out ideas and just I think switching gears is the thing. Of course, burnout, but I think burnout and writer's block are different. And I think just stopping isn't going to help writer's block in my experience. It's just going to prolong it. So shifting gears. And another exercise someone on Book Talk suggested, which I really like and I've been trying to integrate, is if I'm struggling to write a scene, change the environment, change the weather, and see how that fires off the synapses. Right. So if it's an empty scene, have like a light flicker, or it's starting to get kind of cold, or have it start raining, and have that visual element of your brain trigger. And then that will helpfully just naturally progress the characters. Right. Because if you got characters walking somewhere and then you're like, okay, and it starts raining, that changes their behavior. It changes the conversation. It changes the speed at which they're going to the location.
I like that. That's really cool.
I've talked with a few people who have had that same situation. You know, there's like Bill and Jack stood in empty field, surrounded by grass, no wind, nothing happening, sun shining, pure day. Walking 5 minutes later, rain begins falling and drenching them as cloaked enemies appeared on the horizon of the forest. You know, they're like, oh, interesting. Now it's raining and there's enemies. Huh. So this kind of goes into...
quick. Sorry, Nathan, but Nathan's a Marine, and David, we want to thank you for your service. So we appreciate that. Not all of us were in the armed forces on this podcast, but we do appreciate those who have served and are currently serving. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Absolutely. And now we'll take a 5-second break for nothing, because we have no sponsors. So on to the next question, which actually kind of wraps into to what we were talking about. When you're writing, are you a pantser or a planner, or are you a mixture of both?
Yeah, it's very much both. It's very much both, because go Dave.
Yeah, the frame and major plot points and the end state is known, right? However, how it got there has been much more organic than putting everything on rails and getting there. So, major events that have happened, we're like, okay, this is something that's going to happen. This is something that's going to happen. And this is where they're going to end up at the end of this sort of block. But we've had a lot of, okay, so what would this person end up doing? And then sometimes that sort of shifts how soon or how far away that kind of event would happen, or in what context the event happened. So it is very much both. And we kind of let the character side of it get us there, instead of saying like, okay, well, by 4 o'clock this afternoon, Steven has to say this because otherwise he won't be able. If we're writing it, we're in a flow, and it's like, well, that's not really what we think that he would do, or this other thing is happening, right? Then it kind of it moves everything around.
Yeah, it's so character driven for us, and there's elements of both in that, but like to the point where we had a whole like arc of plot stuff planned, and then I sat down, I was like, look, this character is just going to run off and try and kill this other character. It's a dumb, stupid thing to do, and it wasn't planned, but it's just what they would do. There's no reason for, like, in their head, why wouldn't they just run? And that's something we like to tackle, is like, we want characters to be realistic. We want them to be grounded. And so like you see horror movies, like, why don't they just run out of the room? Or why doesn't that character just go up and blow that character away? It's like, well, in this circumstance, we're like, this character needs to just try and blow that character away, and we're just gonna have to deal with the repercussions of that, because it's an apocalyptic story, so it's kind of the Wild West out there. Is there's less law enforcement we have to deal with, and but of course those are elements that we also have to deal with. So it's like mid-apocalyptic, so you have more freedom to explore what would people actually do in these situations.
Very cool.
Well, we had a podcast where we were talking about this exact stuff, about how, a lot of people, you create the characters, right? And then your characters are alive and they drive the story from that point on. Point A, B, C, and D, the points and the arcs that are important that tell the overall plot of the story. But once your characters are alive, they just determine. Your characters make those choices for you. So that's kind of cool to hear that that's where it's at for you guys too.
They're not static, and I think one of the major benefits is characters that were based on people that we knew, or that had a minor role or something, end up. We have people in this characters set in the story now doing way more than we thought that they were ever going to do, because they sort of just evolved into like, oh, well, that guy was just sort of meant as a foil, or that person was, they serve one small specific purpose, and they're like, well, actually, like, they're in this to win it now, so we gotta, they're
if they exist, they're gonna factor into things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
See, that's the thing that I love too, is the world could be cool, the story could be cool, but characters are memorable. They're the ones that people go back to, and they're the ones that are almost like the spokesperson for the world, for the magic system, for the story. Because if a character is boring or flat, then you may not want to read it. No matter how cool the world is, it's just. So that's awesome.
Picked a bad vehicle to show your story if your character is kind of boring.
Yep.
And isn't that where you see, 9,554 Kindle readers highlighted, "I love you," Soraya told John. Like, it's usually dialogue, think of Lord of the Rings and Gandalf. Remember that stuff. It's the characters, what they speak of.
Yep.
Etc.
So,
excuse me.
You guys had mentioned the military aspect and research, and having a firsthand knowledge is helpful, but how much research actually goes into writing your story outside of just the military, like in general?
Yeah. It's a roll of the dice. It depends on the scene we're writing and what we're writing, because having it set in the real world means we have to do research in the real world, because there's that backdrop. But it's also a fantasy version. Like it's so like the whole premise is magical beings used to exist in our world, and they removed themselves from our world to avoid the flood. The flood known through every major religion, from Judaism to Christianity to Hinduism. There's a story of a giant flood. So that is the catalyst of what removed them from our world, and we forgot about them over time, and then they pop back into our world, right? So my research varies from studying things like Tolkien and his language and how he does that, and I draw a lot of inspiration for my elves from Tolkien's language. But I have each of my groups of races have different naming conventions. So like elves, I look a lot at Tolkien language and what he uses. And then like orcs, it's just what sounds like a good orc name. Right. But then like characters, I think names are the things I do the most research on. because I think names are really important. So like every character who's a major character, and minor characters are usually just drawn from. I used to have a Patreon, and patrons are where those came from, or people I know. But as far as like elvish characters or dwarvish characters, it's either drawn from Tolkien, or dwarvish is something that sounds cool, kind of like orcs. But then like human names are all really specifically chosen. Like Peter Blair, one of the main characters, his name means rocky battlefield. Or Sarah Young is the people's princess. Or character Marl Reynolds means bitter advisor. Things like that, where there's just this extra level of meat to the story behind these names. And they're like, you think Peter Blair, okay, sounds like a standard protagonist name, but there's depth to what that name means, and who he is as a person, because he's informed by that.
You know, a lot of where I find it myself ended up doing research is we have a lot of characters who are not from the States.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a pass on a lot of things because, you know, it suddenly becomes a fantasy world, and kind of how nationalities will play into it, you know, stops being a major factor. But like, I don't think it's fair to write a story where you have a side character who's, well, he's a 55-year-old Irish dude. This was probably 2010. What's that guy's experience in some, you know, why is he a mercenary? Well, you know, there's obvious question about why that person would have ended up doing those things. So we have to reach out, because we're both American dudes. You know, if we're going to write a story where there's characters from all over the place, we need to be good about that. You know, I'm not a mercenary. I'm active duty, right? So I got, you know, mercenary manual of the mercenary soldier. I got a ranger handbook, and I've got a Boy Scout handbook because I wasn't a Boy Scout. So like, I gotta make sure my ducks are in a row. If I got a Boy Scout, you know, is there a merit badge for that? I don't know. We're gonna find it. You know, so
yeah. And like another example, it's random sometimes too. Like a few weeks ago, I spent an hour figuring out the math of like, okay, how far could an Olympic athlete run in this set of time? So how many miles away would they need to be calculated by this? And then I have to translate that to like the elvish way of saying it, because an elf isn't going to say, oh, it's this many miles, or they're not going to say it's going to be this many hours. They're going to completely phrase how long it's going to take them to travel that distance differently. So it's like, hey, we'll be there by nightfall if we move fast, as opposed to, hey, it's a half-hour drive, so it's like a 3-hour run.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's something that a lot of maybe just readers don't understand what goes into writing when you have multiple races or even just multiple nationalities, how you would describe something, and instead of just throwing in the generic, oh, it's this many hours for running, taking into account what your characters would think and how they would phrase it shows, again, a level of maturity in writing and adds to the world, I think.
Yeah. Another fun research. We have there's a big part of book 2 is a cult. And so one of the POVs is a person in a cult, and it's like an orcish cult. And so my wife bought a book on cult language and read it, and we discussed every chapter and made sure the cult language and the evolution of, and we watched some documentaries on cults, and just making sure we're presenting this cult and how it should, and the things that go into what makes a cult, and the things that go into getting out of a cult, and the ways they do brainwashing and they do gaslighting, and how like your name. And what's really funny is I started writing it before we did the research, and multiple times throughout the process, she's like, okay, so this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, read what I wrote. She's like, that is 1-to-1. How did you do that?
We got lucky on a couple things for sure. For sure.
Hey, sometimes better lucky than good.
Right.
Hey, I'll take it.
That's awesome. Now, you were talking about, since you're talking about that stuff, I'll kind of lead with this question, since it has something that kind of pertains. What's your favorite magic system that you've created, and why? Or something about your magic system that you really like, and then that you want people to know more about?
Okay, yeah, that's a great. So we draw, like I said, we draw a lot of inspiration from like Dungeons and Dragons. We draw a lot of inspiration from Aragon. Aragon's got my favorite magic system of all time, besides mine. So there's different elements. So there's passive and there's active magic, and they both present themselves differently. But I think probably the funnest thing to me is what we have, what's called castologies. So each race has a primary castology, and what that is magic exists as an energy. It's essentially so you've got matter. It's another form of matter, essentially, that can be tapped into by certain people who are descendants of those who have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of arcane, which was a cousin to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of eternal life. So there's a third tree in the Garden of Eden. So some just fun background stuff that I can't help myself but tell you about. But each race has their own specific castology, and what a cast.
See what you're doing right now?
There we go. And that's why we work well together.
But the difference is this isn't writing a book. This is explaining why you like it. So you are free to continue.
Absolutely.
Wow. You're going to regret that. No. So castologies. Each race has a main castology, and that is how they harness magic and put it forth, right? Because magic is a form of energy. It can be dangerous. You can technically use it just in a raw form, but it needs to be funneled and controlled in order to get the results you want. So the elves, in inspiration from Tolkien, they sing their magic into the world. The dwarves use runes that they tattoo into their bodies. They can, if they want it to be a spell or the spell that they intend to use over and over, they get it tattooed into their skin, and they can enchant items this way. Humans use spoken word, and then orcs use raw emotion because they have because of the origin of how they got their magic. They have a much more fragile attachment to magic. So their magic is usually extremely powerful, but extremely dangerous and volatile because it's based in their emotion. So there's a character in book 1 called the Weeping King who uses his sorrow and tears as an orc to cast. And that makes him extremely dangerous because that's not an emotion they usually use to cast in their society. And then with that, you've got like taboos. So like a magic wand, for example, would be a taboo because it's a combination of dwarvish magic and human magic if you're using this wand with runes tattooed onto it, but speaking the word. So you're going to be able to get super specific with your magic, but it's seen as sort of uncool because you're combining their different schools. And then there's the Eolan, who are another race, who are a forgotten race, who use whispers to cast.
Wow.
I've heard the whisper thing, and I do gotta say, pause really quick. If y'all ever do, when you see my Guardians of Zydaria come out, don't think I stole the idea of the tree thing from you. I just think it's really cool that we both have a tree. I've got a Celestrio and an Elementrio. Trio is the ancient word for tree, and they have fruits on there where people can get magic from eating said fruit, but not from the one tree, just like the parable of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I thought that was pretty cool. Somebody else has
trees are inherent
thing.
to magic, right?
Yeah.
Every society that has magic, from Tolkien to C.S. Lewis to Viking, Norse mythology, trees are inherently connected to magic throughout our history, aren't they?
Absolutely.
That's funny. That's 3 of us because my story deals with Judeo-Christian religion and very, very up in your face, heaven and hell, angels and demons, and I do bring in the tree of good and evil in mine. So that's pretty funny. But each one of us seems to have a different take on it, which is why when you write, I mean, I'm someone who doesn't believe that there's anything new under the sun. Everything that we see or read or whatnot is kind of drawn from something. Then your experiences and your personal touch on those ideas is what makes it unique and different.
Absolutely.
100%. Well, that's a neat magic system. I mean, just all those things are so just like different and unique, and that's awesome. That really is.
I could see where the fun of playing with the battle scenes and everything could come in, where the human, if they have laryngitis or some type of they had something bad that causes them not to be able to speak, all of a sudden they don't have magic at the moment. So I imagine very dangerous scenario to be in your world.
Yeah, one of the main magic users in book 2 is she's like a quarter Korean, so she like starts focusing on learning Korean better because it lives in rural Georgia, and so if she's using Korean to do her casting, no one else is going to understand the magic she's using.
That's cool.
That's cool.
Now, if a dwarf because we're talking about lore and stuff, if a dwarf's one of his runes are marred by like an injury or something, does that negate the rune power? Or is it because it's tattooed, it's still usable?
So I don't think if a dwarf had a knife go through one of their tattoos, I don't think they would use that spell.
Okay.
Because the tattoo itself forms how the energy is distributed.
It would be like using a lightsaber with a damaged kyber crystal. It's very dangerous.
Very much so. Yep. Yeah, it's probably going to explode.
That's a really great way of saying it, depending on the spell, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a feeling. Your destiny.
I do also like, in particular, that, and it comes out, the world, all the like the quote unquote like higher races like have their all systems done, but the world is inherently a very magical place as well. And even amongst characters that have lived in that world a long time and learned individuals don't understand how everything works. There is a deeper, there's like, you mentioned like a story that has like a pretty heavy-handed Judeo-Christian thing, like don't cite the dark magics to me, which there's stuff out there that your learned individuals are like, I don't understand that, and it's out there in the world, so it permeates everything, and it's a force to tap into, but it's not totally understood and totally controllable. And so there's always this X factor element out there of like, this can happen, and even the characters that are wearing this look to the elf and say, what's going on, and the elf has to be like, buddy, I don't know. And there's no, sometimes you just don't, have.
Yeah, that's why the rules exist, not because it doesn't work without them, but because it does work without them.
Yeah. See, that's fun. As an author, you can take that, and it takes away the Deus Ex Machina aspect of it, where it's like, we're going to try this thing. Yeah. That's, as the author, you're like, yeah, this is going to help them, but the consequences are going to negate how amazing it would be if it just worked flawlessly.
Right.
Yeah. Harry Potter in the Chamber of Secrets, just like, Harry Potter, you've been gifted with the sword of Godric Gryffindor, one of the largest Deus Ex Machinas ever, but it worked, so it's all right.
Yeah,
that's a multi-billion-dollar franchise, I guess.
So,
we should do that.
Yeah. No matter where you are in writing, there's always going to be something for everybody, and that brings me to another question. So you guys are both indie authors. Why did you choose to go the indie route? And if you have the opportunity to go traditional publish, would you? And if yes or no, why or why not?
Yeah. So why did we go indie? So can you see how thick this book is?
A lot of words.
This is over 231,000 words, almost 800 pages. And I've never published anything before. So
is that single space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Space and a half, I think. No, it's whatever the industry standard is. I change it every time I work on it, so it's whatever the industry standard is.
You're not.
But yeah, so
350,000 words, so you're good.
Right. So we queried for a year. I spent a year in the trenches doing the querying. I received over 100 projections. They all read the same or very similar of, hey, cool, not for me. Or, hey, this is really good. It's not in the market for me. Or, because the market right now is romantasy. In the fantasy genre, it is romantasy. It is easy, quick fiction. And that's fine. My wife is convinced the market's going to come back around to books like this eventually. It just takes time because the market goes through cycles. And she's an English teacher. She's very in tune with those cycles. But after a year of that and going through beta readers and going through this thing and just being every single person who reads it and every single person who goes through it, and people I know would have called it quits a lot sooner if it wasn't good, is like, this is good. I was like, I want people to read it. And if that means I don't make money off it for a decade, that's fine. If that means it takes a decade to break even, that's fine if people are reading it, because we believe the story is good enough to get there. Like that ultimately I wanted people to read it. And that's what it boiled down. The other element of it is we didn't want to have to change it. This is our story through and through. There is no added sex scenes because that's what the market wants now. There's no, it's dark, it's gritty, it's rough, but there's no, I have younger brothers who I wanted to be able to read it, who grew up in a very traditional household. So there's no sexual content. There's references to sexual things sometimes. There's no sexual content. There's no swearing in the book. Characters swear, but it's not shown on screen. So there's elements, and it's written for adults, but it can be read by people of all ages. That's another thing is it's like, what's your target audience? My target audience is anyone over the age of 12 who could read. That's who I wrote this for. I didn't write it for just adults or just 25 to 40-year-olds or just 60-plus-year-olds or just high school boys. I wrote it for anyone who has a love of fantasy over the age of 12.
That's beautiful.
So there's a lot of factors. And we worked, thank you. We worked a long time, and it was not cheap, and we're still in the red for a while, but it's also so much more gratifying. So much fun, because I can make changes to it on the fly. Not that I'm going to be making much changes, but I can make edits when people notice things, because even though it went through 8 runs of edits, there's still a typo here and there. It's within the industry standard.
Oh, yeah.
But
that's gonna happen.
But also, I get to have conversations with readers as they're going through it. I get to have a personal connection, and it is so much fun just having people interact with me to that degree. Like someone the other day, I was talking about morally gray characters, and someone who's reading it is like, "You talked about this main character; he's a morally gray character." No, he's not. And I'm having a debate with one of my readers about whether or not one of my characters is morally gray, and it's so just cathartic, because I agree with everything you say. Keep reading.
You'll see. Yeah.
Oh man. So does that mean that you guys wouldn't go traditionally published if a company approached you?
If the check is big enough. See, here's the thing. I think if we're ever approached by a traditional publisher, it's because we've already succeeded. Right. And so my response is, okay, sure. What do I get out of this? You're not allowed to change anything. If you have to change anything to do this, then we're not doing it. I have to retain my power and control of the story. If the story stays the same and I get a little less per copy, but I get some money in my pocket overall, I've got a daughter, I'm going to do that. But like, I didn't put myself in a place, neither of us put ourselves in a place financially where this is make or break for us, because that would be foolish, because I'm a family man. This is a hobby, and that's going to affect, those financial decisions are going to affect how things go with book 2 and book 3, and how long it takes to get them out, and whether or not we go with the same artist and stuff. But they're going to get done. They're going to get released. It just might not be as pretty of a cover.
Yeah. Hey, that's what we all want, I think. At least those that we've interviewed on this podcast, Nathan, myself, and Stratos Arrows, we just want our stories out there. Making money would be great, but we want to tell stories that people enjoy, and for them to interact with us and tell us that, oh man, I hate that character, or oh my God, that's my favorite character I've ever read, or something. Those kinds of interactions are special, and I think that's why we do it. So absolutely, you don't want to put yourself in a financial where it's make or break, but at the same time, if I can keep control, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'll also say I would not have been able to do indie publishing without Dave. Without David's involvement from beginning to end, he helped financially support it. He has met with us because he believes in the product. And if I know Dave very well, if he didn't believe in what we were doing, he wouldn't have spent countless hours, weekend after weekend after weekend, working on it. So that was a big part of my decision to go indie. He's like, hey, my best buddy has faith in this, and he would tell me if this is a bad idea, it's going to get there eventually. I have full confidence this book is going to take off with enough time.
So that kind of brings me to my next question. If you've seen any of my TikToks and content and whatnot, I'm a huge fan of conventions. Have you guys had a chance to go to any, or are you looking at any? Or because I think that's a great place to go, especially as an indie author, to get your books out there, make a little money, but also meet readers face to face.
Yeah, Dave, I took the last one.
Oh yeah, sure. Have not at this point been able to do that, but we're looking at it. When we started this, and we're mixed at Red is in the Georgia area. The biggest one for Georgia is Dragon Con in Atlanta.
It sure is.
And we've attended the convention plenty of times when we were in school, out of school. We'd love to go back, dressed as we are, instead of, as someone else's character, for a change. That'd be really great. And kind of the main support structure base of all people that, we're into is all kind of in the area. So, feel like it might be in the future for sure, to do that. Biggest kind of, I think, question about it is, since it's indie book, we have to weigh, transportation and like, hey, if we're going to order, X number of copies, right? It's get it all there, get it all back. What happens if you don't sell it? What happens if you do? It's something we're both not familiar with, that side of the con, right? Being on the other side of the artist table. And something we're definitely looking into because we're both interested in that. And as you may have noticed, not afraid to dress the part. So
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Get with me off camera and everything, and I'll help you guys out with everything that I know. I've made a couple of connections at cons. One of them's actually going to Dragon Con this year, so I'm excited to hear what happens with him and how he does. What's up, Nathan?
And I was going to tell you guys, just like Alfred, I've studied Dragon Con for a few years now. Plan on about 3,000 to 4,000 is what you're going to need in your pocket to be able to do that type of convention. Just as an FYI. I mean, I know it sucks to hear that, but the table's about $1,600, but split between two people, it's less. And then of course the hotel and the books. But if you can get into Dragon Con, I mean, I'm trying to get into Dragon myself. So I mean, if you can get into Dragon Con, that's where it's at. It's
yeah, I've heard they've started doing as of last year. I heard as of last year they started doing a special author of like tabling time that's not the vendor tables, which is cheaper and more limited. So that's probably where we would try and get in. And I've got a whole plan. So like I have one of my most successful TikTok series was me asking people for details and telling them their odds of surviving the first 30 days in the world of my book. I want a banner that says, "Would you survive the Fey apocalypse?" on it. And then Dave and I will be in full cosplay at this table with books, talking to people as if we're the characters and rating their odds of survival and trying to get them to pick up books. So we're going to really lean into it if we can get there. But yeah, I mean, I had a daughter last year, so and my wife's a teacher.
I'm active duty, so it's hard to. I mean, that's a 4-day usually, but I'm working on transition, so it's getting away for stuff like that is a little bit more difficult. And I haven't been to Dragon Con or really any convention since before COVID. I was Oconus for a while, and then we're all wearing masks, so I don't know what's different about Dragon Con than 20.
I think it's back. I think it's back to basically the way it was. Yeah,
back. Okay.
Since 2020, it's been back.
When you fill out the application for Dragon Con, when you fill out the application for Dragon Con, absolutely put the fact that you guys have that TikTok series and that you'd like to do that as well, because it'll draw people in. It'll keep that kind of interaction that I think they want. It may help your chances for getting in. But yeah, there's a dozen different cons that I know of in the South Tennessee, North Georgia area. So I don't know how far that is for you guys. I know Atlanta is kind of central Georgia, north central Georgia. So I live in Tennessee, so we're not that far from each other. And I have a couple of different cons that I'm familiar with in that area. So like I said, we'll get on our TikTok later. We'll talk about that type of stuff. But I'm all for helping get you guys out, and I love cons. So if I can get more people to go to them, it just makes me happy. So
I got that itch for sure, man. I wanna go back, whether I get to have a table or not. I'd love to go back dressed like this, So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll just carry a cart around with the book copies.
And we've got time for about 2 more questions. So I'm gonna pick a tough one. Alfred would probably do the same. And then for all of our people listening in, thanks for joining us today and listening to the spotlight for these 2 authors. And make sure to check them out on social media and whatnot. We'll give you all those handles at the end. But yes, we appreciate all of our listeners. So I'm going to ask one of my favorite questions to ask, and what's your most embarrassing moment in your writing career? Either one of you.
So we did a book signing.
Oh no.
No.
No, we got to hear it now.
Okay, so we did a book signing. I had to take leave to go do this book signing. And so when I justified it, word got out at my command. And so now my brigade headquarters, I'm that guy now, right? I'm the book guy. So I can't go anywhere. And then the end all be all of all arguments I have with the rest of the staff is like, okay, author. Like, okay, co-author, go write it down, guy. And I'm like, it's now I'm just, it's my boss tried very hard to showcase it, like, wow, one of our guys is doing this stuff, but it kind of as happens in this profession, no matter what you do, it's going to get flipped on you. So now I can't walk around without people being like, oh, hold on, let me, I'm like, come on, man, I'm just trying to do my job here, so a little embarrassing and for a good reason, but still like, all right, like I just want to just trying to go deep, dude. Like, leave me alone.
Oh man.
Hey, if it makes you feel better, man, when I was in the Marine Corps, I grew up with a background in musical theater and operatic singing. So people in the Marines, they're even worse than the Army when it comes to giving each other crap. They found out that I was a singer, so I got the crap end of the stick for that. They're just like, yeah, okay, there's singer. Yeah. And you can guess what else they would probably say too. So leave that as unspoken, but
yeah, I can only imagine there, my man.
You're not alone, brother. You're not alone. How about you, Mick?
It has to do with the signing as well. I think it was a really cool signing because it was a bookstore that had just opened up in the kind of the town we based Paragon on, in Statesboro, Georgia. And so I contacted the bookstore before I realized I knew the owner. So he invited us up as their first featured author, and we did a really cool signing. We had like 50 people turn up. It was amazing. I sold out of my books, all my hardcovers.
That's awesome.
So the embarrassing thing would be, I should have read the sneak peek that I read in front of everyone ahead of time for book 2, because it's a first draft sneak peek. And I'd just been talking about how the book's not fairy smut and blah, 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 blah. And it's this cult scene the language was more charged than I realized. Because it was supposed to be like this character's being like, she's in a cult, she's being abused and blah, 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 blah. But it came off as a lot more steamy than I intended it. So I'm in front of like all these people from my like hometown reading this scene after just saying, it's not fairy smut. And it's just like, this scene is kind of, some of the words here are definitely going to get rewritten. So it doesn't come off as steamy as it does. And I just read the whole thing and my wife is just like, okay, moving on.
That's fantastic.
Oh man.
I said there was one word I used. What was it? You're supposed to be like getting down on.
I was just standing next to you sweating, man. So
anyway, prostate yourself instead of prostrate yourself.
I want you to prostrate.
I misread the word.
Oh goodness.
That's great.
Their stunned silence was very reassuring.
Yeah, I just kept going. I wrote it right. I just completely mispronounced it.
That was as friendly a crowd as we were going to get. So,
man.
And to make you feel better too, since I made him feel better, at least I tried to. I'm a narrator, and I don't like smut, and so I don't do that. But I had somebody wanted me to do it, and I said, well, if you want me to do it in Emperor Palpatine's voice, I will. So they made me read a segment on TikTok Live, a smut segment in Palpatine's voice.
That's amazing.
That's good.
It was holy cow. So embarrassing.
That's good.
So this isn't going to be my main question, but I am curious. How far out is book 2?
Yeah,
we just got started on the second draft. So our process is a lot more streamlined now. I expect we will be done with the second draft and ready for beta readers before the end of the year. Hopefully,
I think that's totally achievable.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So it's going to be a lot easier and faster to get out. We're not going to spend a year querying, so that'll cut a year off of our process time. I know what I'm doing a lot more. Next year, tentatively, we're also debating whether or not we wait to release book 2 until book 3 is virtually finished to try and do a closer set of releases. But we'll see, because we haven't even started book 3.
Yeah, but I think most readers would be understanding. Fantasy series, especially the size that you write, size that I write, it's expected. You're gonna have to wait a couple of years for the next installment, just because you don't want garbage. You want a well-crafted story.
Yeah, and book 2 is people are going to be a lot more chomping at the bit than they are with book 1. Book 1 is more self-contained. Book 2, you're going to want the next one as soon as possible. Not that readers don't already, but it ramps things up.
For beta readers, I think Alfred and I and Stratos might have to, with the Discord page, create a section for people who join, whether because they heard you guys or another interview, that like to read, and have a section for beta readers in that Discord, so that people like you and other indie authors can get that support and that help if you need it. When the opportunity comes up. So
and
hopefully,
I have not. I know we're mutuals on TikTok and everything. I have your book. I have not read it yet. It's up next. So I've got.
It scares people. It's all good.
No, it's not even because it's the size. I love large books. I love reading large books. It's just I've got so many from the cons I go to and friends that have sent me stuff.
Sure.
Just never-ending TBR, but I do have it, and it's one of the ones that I've been excited to read. So it's definitely going to be read, and I will
look forward to your reaction.
Absolutely. But here is my real question, and it goes to TikTok you put up not too long ago. Stories can be objectively bad. And I saw that caused some controversy on TikTok.
A little bit. Yeah.
My favorite video of the last year.
I love it.
Hands down.
And I know I don't want to make you rehash everything, but what made you want to put that on the internet? Was it all of the for me it was cathartic for me, because all of the recommendations that you get on TikTok and Book Talk, it's like, do I want to read that? Is it actually a good book, or is it just a whole bunch of people who are loving the smut or the steaminess or whatever? So what made you want to put that on TikTok or put that out there?
I mean, it was a combination of things. I just keep saying, it's subjective, it's subjective, it's subjective. It's like, why are we? I'm trying to phrase this carefully. It's okay for things to be bad, and it's okay to say things are bad. And I have a very high standard for things, and I'm seen by a lot of people as a hater, because I know how good things can be. So whenever something doesn't live up to that, it upsets me, because we don't have to put up with that. Right. So
your point earlier, I guess, way back at the beginning of the conversation about, like, sometimes people put together a world or some aspect of a story that's great, and then the execution of it ends up not living up to the potential of whatever element that they have stumbled upon or cultivated, right? That's good. And it's painful for me. Can't speak for Mick, but you kind of said it was for yourself, right? When you're like, wow, what a great concept. And then be like, but I just can't love it because of XYZ thing. And I know Mick, because it was, I know you've read things recently that you were like, wow, great idea. Just not quite where you thought it was going to end up. And you're like, and it's worse because you can see the potential, right? There's stuff that's out there. I mean, the big issue now, right, is like AI books on Amazon that are just getting churned out. It's like a cash grab money scheme. Those are just bad.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's not even literature. That's just words on a page to try to get some money from Amazon. Those are just bad, right? But that's okay, because a computer worded and it's just a scam. It's painful when it's like someone put time and effort into this, and you're like, man, we need to just like get you. We're so close, right? Just push you over the top, and that's you ruffled feathers with it, but
I loved it.
I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me was the video of the girl being like, if you wrote a book, it deserves at least 3 stars. Like, shut up. No, it doesn't. I don't. Just because you put effort into something doesn't mean it's good. Like, I've read a good number of indie books since I started. I've started Book Talk, and 25 to 50% of them haven't been good. And I'm not going to put those people on blast. I'll leave reviews on their Amazon. In some cases, I won't. In one case, my wife left a review on a book that we both read for an author, and someone who was a supporter of theirs just review bombed my book. Very clearly review bombed my book. Like, we have the receipts, and I was just like, okay, cool. So I don't want to get involved in drama. I don't want to do that. The romantasy area, it's dangerous for indie authors to a degree. I lost a fair bit of followers for that video about subjective versus objective. But I mean, people also don't listen to the full thing. My point was, you can still enjoy an objectively bad book. That doesn't make it good.
Like,
it's fine to enjoy an objectively bad book.
Yeah, we did a
bad books I love.
Yeah, I mean, there's B-grade sci-fi movies. I mean, they're like, I think you actually mentioned that they're bad, but we enjoy them because they're bad. Like that's the whole part.
Right.
Like my sister and my dad have watched probably every zombie movie ever put out, from high school level all the way to like World War Z kind of stuff. So, and you watch them because you just like zombies, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like you can turn around and say, this does not belong in like a Hollywood red carpet event, but it was still fun for what I did. And the
Right.
other distinction you had made was your opinion is subjective. That changes depending on who reads it. But you could still turn around and say Twilight is a horribly written book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And commercial success doesn't equal quality, like you just
Correct.
like you mentioned,
Absolutely.
and Nathan mentioned
Absolutely.
about stuff in Harry Potter.
I think something to remember for everybody is there's something for everyone, and that's the whole thing with genres. It's like, something's classified like I write very anime styled, like, and I've had a lot of people with backlash who are like, anime's not a genre. Well, actually it is, but that's okay. That's your opinion. You can have it. But
Sure.
if you want people to be able to find things that they like, you have to have a genre that meets their expectations. If you find a horror book and you don't like horror, but you go read it and then you're just like, this book's bad because it's disgusting.
Right.
Well, you knew it was a horror book going into it, so why'd you pick it off the shelf to begin with,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
same thing with Star Wars and Star Trek. Some people are like, they're bad, but it's like,
But yeah, even if like you're saying, if it's a genre you don't like and you're reading it, that's on you, right? But even if it's something you do like you're saying you write a lot of anime, or you probably read a lot of anime stories, right? If you can't recognize whether a story, like there's a difference in quality between a work of art or a story, then like you're not being honest with yourself either. Like,
Yeah.
right? There's just part of the reason that I enjoy reading everything is because you get a different look at every time, right? I mean, you never know what you're going to get until you start opening it up and reading it, and the differences are what make things, variety is the spice of life sort of situation. To say that like this a book A and book B have to be, neither of them can be bad, well then like where are we at with, if everything's good, nothing's good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah. And I mean, I was also asked like, what are some objectively bad books? And the guy asking was like, wanted to hear books I've read that were objectively bad. And there's the indie ones, but I was like, popular books I've read that are objectively bad. I'd read one of the 5 I listed because I don't. If a book is bad, I pretty quickly put it together and stop reading it. And the one I had read, I DNF'd. But also a book can be objectively bad written. It can also have objectively harmful content.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not interested about reading a book where children are getting abused or hurt or things like that, unless it's a book about, the child sex trafficking, where there's an FBI agent hunting down a mob of, child abusers and things like that. That has to be painted to show you these are the things that happen in the real world. It's uncomfortable. Don't read it if you're not prepared for it. But like you said, there's some stuff that's just like, why is this in here? This really doesn't belong in anything.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be bad books for everybody, and there's always somebody else might like it, somebody else might not like it, and that's the beauty of it. Opinions are meant to be opinions. Everybody can have them, and nobody is wrong or right. So that's what I think is beautiful about the indie books, is that there's some really creative ones out there that you just don't find in the trad world, I kind of feel. But again, that's to my own opinion. But yeah.
So guys, we want to thank you for coming on. I think we're getting close to time, but I want the listeners to hear where they can follow you, where they can buy your books. If you're on social media, if you have a website, just please let us know and tell the audience.
Yeah, so Michael Melwasul, MichaelMelwasul, on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of it. It's all the same. Luckily, it doesn't shift between. It's super easy to find. I'm most active on TikTok. I'm even on YouTube, but I'm most active on TikTok. And that's really where you'll find most of my stuff. You can get my books on Amazon. You can get them at barnesandnoble.com. You can get them really anywhere books are sold. You can go to your indie bookstore and ask them to order you a copy, and they will. You can go to your library and ask them to order a copy, and they will. I have signed copies available on my Etsy. which is connected in my link tree, which you can just search my name or search my book name, Paragon Exordium, on any of those. There's only a few of the hardcover misprints left. But yeah, those are the main places. You can also, if you want to support me more, the signed copies are going to help me out the best if that's what you're looking to do. Or if you want to buy direct from Ingram Spark, that also has the best, cut Amazon out of the middle thing. But if you do read my book, please leave an Amazon review. We're getting so close to that 50 review mark. And we're getting close to 200 copies out there, which is very exciting. I'm hoping we hit both of those marks by our anniversary in May. And then Dave is only on TikTok.
I have been dragged kicking and screaming to TikTok by Mick. And if you can find him, you can probably find me. The TikTok is at David Elberin. It's David, common spelling, dot, Echo, Lima, Bravo, Oscar, Romeo, India, November. Elberin.
And that's a reference you'll only get if you read the book.
Have to read it to understand why I have chosen this as it. So
awesome.
And we'll put the links in the YouTube description as well, so simple for everyone to find you guys.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode, special guest edition of the War of Nerds podcast. We will be back eventually, very soon, depending on when you're watching it. It'll actually be very soon. But until that time comes, I've been one of your hosts, Nathan Helm.
And I'm the other host, Alfred Muller.
Funky fantasy, the bull, two special guests, bum bum ba dum dum. That's on the War of Nerds. Till next time.